Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages.
Oh yeah, good evening. It is Tuesday, the 18th of August. I am Dave McClelland. Welcome to Mockdown Confidential. It's like my weekend mockdowns, but more intimate and up close with just one special guest. And I'm going to introduce that guest in just a moment. But first of all, I just want to give a mention, not to our sponsors, but people who would appreciate your funds. A lot of people in the entertainment industry are struggling in this pandemic. And so I want to share with you the Equity Benevolent Fund. Now, the Equity Benevolent Fund is giving help to anybody who needs it. You can go to their website, which is this one just here. It's in the chat down there. You'll see it. There's all kinds of links. So please have a look at that and join up, give a little if you can. Now, there is also, when I can find the right place here, there's the YouTube channel, the Equity Benevolent YouTube channel. That's the one that we're looking at just now. And it's full of all kinds of actors, such as Sir Ian. Sir Ian is on there. They read monologues. And then if you think they're worthy of help, you can make a donation to the Equity Benevolent Fund, and then that helps people in the entertainment industry who are struggling during this time of pandemic. So do what you can if you'd be so very, very kind. It is time now to move along to my guest for this evening. And my guest for this evening is Andria Hill-Lehr. And let me tell you about Andria. Let's have a little soft jazz while we do that. Andria, she's an actor, writer, educator, counsellor, a seasoned traveller. I met Andria in Nova Scotia in Canada, and now she's in Old Scotia, in Edinburgh, in Scotland. She's joining me tonight, and we're going to have an up-close and personal conversation. So let's bring her in. Andria, hello, how are you?
I'm well, and as you did that introduction, I thought of meeting you in Victoria Station in 2012.
Yes, exactly. It was fun, wasn't it? Oh,
it was a lot of fun.
Do you want a bit more jazz? Oh, yeah.
I'd like to dance with you.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, Andria, how long have we known each other?
Good God. First year, 1995, was it?
95, maybe.
When I saw your bottom.
Yes, you saw my bottom. Now, for anybody who's wondering, and it is an up-close and personal conversation after all. Andrea, you were working at the Atlantic Theatre Festival at that time.
That's right. I was assistant to the artistic director, and I was fortunate enough to sit in on your audition. And I remember one of the rules of auditions, at least old school, the way I was taught, was one never reacts, one simply watches, makes notes, and looks to the artistic director. And you came in and you did your audition piece of Bottom, which made me laugh out loud and got me a couple of disapproving, like, shut it. Let's just be professional. But
yes, and thankfully your laughter was the moment I fell in love with you.
And I fell in love with your bottom. I mean, I fell in love with you.
People
because of your bottom.
do. It's an occupational hazard. But let's just have a look at a couple of things, because we'll take a little trip back in time here. So I've got a picture of you first of all. Let's have a look at that one. When I bring it onto the stream. There we go. Look at you going, hey, what you looking at?
That's more recent. I thought you were going to show one with pigment. In my.
Well, just a moment. We'll get to that. Here we go.
Oh my
Early
God.
days at the Atlantic Theatre Festival. Now, for people who don't know, the Atlantic Theatre Festival ran in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, and it was a wonderful theatre, wasn't it? Made from a converted hockey arena, of all things.
That's right. It even garnered a mention in the book Boom, Bust, and Echo about how to repurpose space rather than tearing down and rebuilding.
Yeah, it was remarkable because it was a wonderful thrust stage in the style of the Stratford Festival. And here in Sheffield we have the Crucible Theatre, which is an excellent thrust stage. All of that kind of same design. I've got some more photos here. Let's just have a look at this one. That's me and Sam Slick goes ahead.
You and Chuck.
Yes, Charles Fellini, a wonderful, wonderful chap who came in as understudy with about a week's notice and did that show and was absolutely wonderful in it. But I went to the Atlantic Theatre Festival when I was over in, was it 2012, 2014, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I managed to get in the theatre. And this is from the stage, from the deck, looking out at the audience. Those were great days, weren't they?
They really were. And it's such a shame that theater has been sort of subsumed by the university and is now being used as a glorified rehearsal space. Oh my God, is that John Innes?
No, that is Robert Seal.
Oh, that's Robert. Sorry, he's shorter in those days.
All right. Robert Seal there in all his glory, pointing to the booth where he would often taunt stage managers with his on stage antics, shall we say.
Yes, I remember the one time when they were able to taunt him because he missed his call.
Ooh.
Do you remember? Were you there that season?
I don't know. I can't imagine Robert doing that. My favorite Robert Seal story is when we were doing The Matchmaker, and during a scene change, a bottle of red wine, or the fake red wine, was knocked over and spilled on the deck. And Robert Seal said, "Don't worry, I'll sort it." And he went out in his costume, rolled around in it, soaked it up, and left the stage.
Beautiful improv.
The consummate professional, I'll tell you. Absolutely wonderful. Let me see what we've got next here. And more backstage stuff here from the Atlantic Festival.
Oh, now that, you see, did you take that in 2012?
I think I might have done. Yeah.
Yeah, because what they did was I was in to do good Lord, it was a thing 1914, the mark of the beginning of the First World War, and we did a show in there, and I went backstage to look and see, and they painted up. You could tell it was as far as somebody's hand could reach that they were trying to cover up, and still above that you could see some of the signatures. But alas, how crazy is that? This is all part of history. It's like the Cavern in Liverpool, people writing on the walls. You don't just go, "Oh, let's cover that up."
Yeah, it's
history.
Yeah, who knows those people anymore? Well, every actor who comes through in future years look at it and they go, "Wow, they were there." And there's something similar at Neptune, and I hope it's still there at Neptune. Neptune Theatre, where everybody who was in there signed on the wall. There was a brick, and you'd choose one for a show. And it was wonderful to see all those people who've been in there before you. It gives you a sense of connection.
Well, connection and history, and that for me is an important thing too. I mean, the history, connecting where we are now to what came before, and looking to the future. Especially in these days of COVID and theater, and what's going to happen to theater. I was thinking today as I was preparing myself to come on tonight, and thinking, what about those young people who are just starting out, who have been in the theater for, 5 years? I was very heartened to watch on the news this morning when they're talking about the whole school grades debacle with the government, that there were still some who were contemplating going into theater. And I thought, oh, hallelujah, absolutely. Because, theater is such a wonderful preparation for anything else that you choose to do in life. In fact, it's a pity that Gavin Williams didn't do theater, because he might have been able to bluff his way a little bit further, a little bit more convincingly. But, you know, it gives such a wonderful groundwork and preparation, and I don't even have the words to describe it. You really have to experience it. And the fact that people would dismiss it as something as, you know, but then I am also concerned about those who've chosen to make this their profession and who've only been practitioners for a few years, whether they're on stage, whether they're backstage. What are they thinking about right now? I talked to my own daughter, you know, Una, how they're getting through this year, looking forward to next year, the festival season at Gross Mourne. But everybody's kind of confident that there will be a next year. And it's not that I'm not confident there will be a next year. I'm wondering what it's going to look like. And I know that this could be a wonderful creative challenge. We see outdoor theaters, the one in Cornwall, the name of which escapes me right now, that they're able to start coming back. And will we see more of this? You certainly can't do Christmas panto outside in the UK. But how will this challenge? What will it look like? You know, when the Great Plague in Shakespeare's time, they were eventually able to reopen the theaters. I think that's going to happen too. But how will it change how we do theater and how audiences receive theater? Because it is such a personal and immediate. I remember going back to the Atlantic Theatre Festival. Remember, or maybe you didn't even know about this, but you know, there were a certain number of tickets that were given away. Certain performances. And so especially the businesses that had promoted, had sponsored. And so there was one guy who worked at a popular inn in Wolfville who was part of the kitchen staff, had never experienced live theater in his life. And he was just vibrating when he left, because he said, I was sitting like in the second row, and when they're talking, you could see them spit, you know, like this wasn't something you get on a movie screen where you get so many takes, you know, and somebody edits it to put you in the best life. Like, you know, you talk about, Bob Seale and having to do things in the moment. I mean, that is the ultimate mental, emotional, physical challenge, right? To keep that story going, to keep that momentum going forward. I'm so passionate about it. Even though I'm not in it now, I worry about it. I know another bright young couple who are leaving the UK. Actually, they leave tomorrow. Amy Reitzma is a wonderful actor who's lived in the UK for the last 6-7 years, came to do a master's degree in directing at Bristol, and ended up settling in London, married Nye Pascoe, were committed to being here. But it wasn't just COVID, it was also what was happening here politically, and whether there was support for the arts. And ultimately, because suddenly they found themselves expecting their first child, decided to go to Nova Scotia because it felt like it was a more compassionate community and more supportive of theater than what they were feeling in England right now.
Yeah, I know, with the situation that we've got here now, with the whole that funding that has been promised, but it's just for venues, and it's not helping any of the freelance practitioners who are absolutely, so many have fallen through the gaps. They're just hanging on to anything. I know people who've been selling their belongings to try and keep going. They've tried to move into other things. And you were saying how theatre grounds you and gives you so much insight into stuff. It unfortunately also gives you an insight into working into call centers and coffee shops and restaurants, because that's what you have to turn to often to keep going in the business, isn't it?
It is. And I think about my pathway, starting out in theater and learning all those important things about developing a character, being a character, getting insight into what has brought that character to this moment of the story that you're telling. And for me, it was kind of a natural segue because I'd always been a writer since my mother first told me you could string together letters to make sentences and then create the ultimate magic of creating stories, that I became interested in biography and what happened to these people in the past and what got them to this particular moment or crossroads in their life. And so it was a natural progression to become a therapist, because now you're working with live people in real time, helping them sort out these challenges, these difficulties. But that said, there is nothing like theater to shine a light on the human condition. And you're forever changed by that. You can't help but be changed by that. I don't care if you're in community theater on a stage, and that magic, that idea of you feel that connection with the audience, but also sitting in the audience and being able to enter into the world of the characters who are portraying that story. It is so profound and important. And that's why it has always been given short shrift, because it's a natural human emotion. It's a human need to be able to tell these stories. And therefore people think, oh, well, they'll do it no matter what, right? They'll get out there like Brecht in front of the stores and create scenes and do that kind of thing. We don't need to give support to that, because they're going to do it anyway. It just oozes out of your pores. You got to tell that story. When in fact, I think it's important for mental health. I've played Medea, I think it's really important. Always has been, always will be. But yeah, we just need to get through this.
Yeah. Look, we talked about my visit. There we go. That's when we met in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, outside Tim Hortons. Well, we met inside Tim Hortons. This is when we took outside.
Oh goodness, and Sam Bissix and my daughter Una Hill McMullen. If you're watching this, happy days. This keeps coming up on our Facebook feeds, as you know.
It does. And look at your hair there.
I know, it was a lot longer, and it's going to get a lot longer too, because not having regular visits with a hairdresser here.
And what else have we got here? And then this is the last time we met, isn't it? This was down at Victoria Station. And I was down for an audition, and you were down to meet and then go back to Edinburgh, weren't you?
That's right. I was picking up the girls at Heathrow. We had 24 magic hours. I was taking them to see, what did I take them to see? The Lion King. And I'd said to them, sleep on the plane, because that's going to be one intense 24 hours.
There we go. And there's a very Krispy Kreme.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Do you know I still had the hats that you gave the girls?
I always get the free hats from Krispy Kreme. Why, I don't know. Maybe it's, I'm fated to be a Krispy Kreme donut slinger at some time, but
or maybe you'll be in an ad.
There we go. That Krispy Kreme used to be my regular stop when I lived in the Blackpool area. Whenever I would go down to London for an audition, it went into Victoria Station, or I get the coach down to Victoria and then have to go there to get the subway. But it was always a routine. I'd finish my audition, head back for the train or the megabus, and I'd go there, get a coffee and a donut, and that was what set me up for the trip back. So it was just excellent. But they were great times, weren't they? Now, what took you to Edinburgh? How come you're there now?
When I was a little girl, I visited here with my parents. I think I mentioned to you earlier that my mom left the UK in 1944 with my eldest brother to emigrate to Canada. And we came back to visit family in, I think, 1969. And my eldest sister's husband's family lived in Prestwick, so we landed there. And this is the land of my mother's forebears, right?
Yeah.
I think there were only two generations that lived in London. So we traveled around quite a bit. And I remember seeing Edinburgh for the first time and absolutely falling in love. It stayed in my memory. And I came back as an adult. I visited several times and thought I would like to live here. And I came back in 2011, 2012, got the chance to kind of dress rehearse what retirement might look like, and thought, yeah, this is it. And there were times when I actually dreamed about Edinburgh, and I thought, did I really dream that, or was I there? At times, it felt like it was almost more real than the the day-to-day life I was living in Nova Scotia at that point.
Yeah.
We still have property in Nova Scotia, and we still go back to visit. But I love the history. I like the culture. I like access to what it has to offer because, and again, maybe because it's a capital city, it feels like there is more support for the arts here than I might find elsewhere. I haven't been here long enough to know whether that support is kind of a genuine, deep appreciation. I think it is.
Yeah.
Then perhaps in some places I've met in Nova Scotia where it's seen as an economic driver or there are economic spin-offs, which is okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's less like prostitution. Right?
Yeah, I've never been to Edinburgh. It is one of the places that
And you're supposed to come visit.
Yes, I know. Now, you mentioned property in Nova Scotia, and I had a good troll around your website, and there it is. The link is in the stuff below. And what an interesting blog you have with the whole renovation story about your place. Good God, the mice.
The mice, the rodents. It's one of those things that I'd lived in a log house before. Actually, when I first met you, I was living in a log house that was designed on a Norwegian design. You stayed there, actually.
Yeah, indeed.
So having lived there, I knew that when you start to find challenges in the log house, it's probably not the little bit you're seeing here. It's like a cavity in a tooth. It's much bigger once you get inside. Yeah. And so when the guy came to take off the first panel, like they're going to start ripping off the outer, these were split logs, and they were going to start tearing them off. And I was in folding laundry, and I heard this almighty Jesus crash. And I thought, what the hell was that? Because it sounded like it was in the house. And I ran out and I waited, and I heard this voice saying, sorry. And I went into the second bedroom, and there was a shelf that my son had made that was on the floor with a piece of gyprock wallboard attached to it. And I looked up where the shelf had been, and I was looking out into daylight. And that was the first clue we had that there were no studs in the east wall and the north wall of the house. It was all just kind of held up with split logs.
Yeah.
And as they started doing all these other it was a voyage of discovery. And then they pulled out the cabinets. It got so bad, we disrupted the mice so badly with just a little bit of poking around that I actually had to play AC/DC on a portable thing in the cupboards to get the damn things to stop from scratching. And they pulled it out. I posted a picture on Facebook and said, this is a mouse hotel that was found under the main cabinet with a hole about this big that had been chewed through the floor, probably by mice and squirrels. And a friend looked at that on Facebook and said, that is not a mouse nest, that's a mouse hotel, right? They had been in there so long, and it was such an odyssey that now it's a lovely, perfectly snug little unit on the Bay of Fundy in Port George. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's private. There's a brook running through it. And most of the critters now live outside.
Most of them.
I did have a problem with one getting in and scraping.
Right, now, I'm going to ask you about a project that became, I would say, almost all-consuming for you. Mona Parsons.
Yes. The only Canadian female civilian imprisoned by the Nazis during World War II. And finding her story, I nearly abandoned my master's thesis. And again, that was 92, 93. I came across the story in the Wolfville, Acadia University Library, and it was a single article. And the headline was from the Acadia newsletter from September 1945, ex-Acadia student found safe at war's end. And I thought, in Europe at war's end, and I thought, oh my God, I wonder who he was.
Yeah.
Natural bias.
Would. Yeah.
Right. And when I realized it was a woman, and I ran out to ask Pat, the archivist, what more do you have on her? And she went, absolutely nothing. You know, there are still people who remember this story that and who knew her. And so that began a quest that started, as I said, 1992, 93. And continues to this day because people continue to contact me with bits of information. Most recently, 5 months ago, a guy who was going through his grandfather's diaries. And he said, I remember when I was a teenager, and parents were divorced and everything. And he was my rock. And we traveled so much together and we did stuff together. And I remember him telling me these stories, but 15 years old, 1970s, you don't really pay attention. He said, and then I inherited his papers and he started talking about this woman. And he was on duty as I think an ambulance attendant or a first aid attendant when they banged on the doors to bring this woman in for medical treatment. And he said, and she was quite manic, as you can imagine, after nearly 4 years in Nazi prisons and camps, and said she was Canadian. And then apparently in the back of the ambulance, he said, we went out to the ambulance. It was late at night. They were going to send them on to somewhere else. And Dr. McLean said, no, okay, let's go down and have a look and see what's behind there. And he opened up the doors and he said, this woman, this really thin woman inside went, Kelly, darling, because of course, Mona was also an actor. And Kelly McLean was a guy a Canadian Forces medical doctor that she had acted with at Acadia University in the 1920s. And so you get this, and it was Kelly, darling, and he said, we took her upstairs to treat her because she walked across Germany for 3 weeks. She had badly infected feet. She was malnourished, filthy. And he said, and she just started talking, kind of like me, I guess, started talking. And he said, and she was still talking when I left that night. And the two of them stayed in the operating room together. And he said, when I got up the next morning, she was gone. And the reason she was gone was because she'd been taken back to Canadian Army headquarters because they couldn't accept that she was who she was just because she said she was that person. But they found all these other people to vouch for the fact that she wasn't a spy, that she was Mona Parsons from Wolfville, Nova Scotia, and that she'd been arrested by the Nazis for her part in helping downed Allied airmen evade capture in occupied Holland while she was married to a Dutch millionaire. Lovely. And
it's almost unbelievable, but it has become that greatest of things, a Canadian Heritage Minute. Yes. So I'm going to play that. And for anybody who's not Canadian and isn't familiar with Canadian television, they have these Canadian Heritage Minutes, which are, they're wonderful little vignettes that give you these snatches of Canadian history. My favorite one always used to be the one about I can smell burnt toast, and that was the brain surgery, wasn't it? It was where they're doing brain surgery, and when you hit that spot, I can smell burnt toast, and it was somebody who was having epilepsy, I think, and they found a bit of the brain because she always smelled burnt toast when she had
that was Wilder Penfield III was the neurologist. Just so you know.
There we go. Well, let's have a look at a Canadian Heritage Minute.
No. I'm telling you, I was in a German prison camp for 4 years.
What's going on here, Sergeant?
Claims she's a Canadian, sir, but she could be a German spy.
What's your name, lady?
Mona Parsons.
Mona Parsons? From Wolfville. It's me, Harry Foster. Gosh, what happened to you?
I was in the resistance. The Gestapo got me.
Darauf besteht die Todesstrafe durch Erschießen.
Meine Herren, guten Morgen.
Dear lady, you have great courage. I recommend you appeal the sentence.
Living in Holland during the war, Mona Parsons had helped downed Allied airmen get back to Britain.
I will escape.
And she did escape. And back in Nova Scotia after the war, she married General Harry Foster.
I gotta tell you, it's a lovely thing, but you know what annoys me about that?
Go on.
When we were filming the documentary, I co-wrote the documentary for History Television. And of course, it was Patrick Watson's baby, as the Heritage Minutes are Patrick Watson's baby. And God love him. He told me, my wife said I fell in love with this woman who'd been dead for 20 years because they thought I was obsessed by the story till they learned it. So we're recording, we're doing the voiceover. I'm in a studio in Halifax. He's in Toronto. And at one point, he stopped and asked for information. We stopped the recording. I went looking for it. And he said, oh, by the way, I've put forward the idea of a Heritage Minute. I went, wonderful. And then he told me the outline. And he said, I'll send it to you. And I went, even before you send it to me, like, you're bracketing her story with the men again. And she escaped with a 22-year-old Baroness, and they walked 3 weeks across Nazi Germany, and then they were rescued, or she was rescued, by the North Nova Scotia Highlanders. Like, this is a Nova Scotia story. And he said to me, Andria, as a writer, as an actor, you understand that sometimes we have to create these dramatic moments. And I went, but they created themselves. Why are you bracketing this? And Harry didn't see her for, like, I think she'd been in the hospital for 4 or 5 days before, Harry ever saw her. And anyway, but I'm glad that she's got a Heritage Minute, even though I remember when it aired the first time, I think it was 2005 on Remembrance Day, and Donna Morrissey, the Newfoundland author, called me and said, oh, I saw it. And I went, oh, God. And she went, oh, so you didn't write that? And I went, no, I didn't. She went, I'm so glad. Because she also knew the story and the drama, and why would I choose to bracket that with the men rescuing this helpless woman when, in fact, these women evaded together and supported one another and were rescued eventually by the North Nova Scotia Highlanders. Anyway.
I mean, it is an absolutely incredible story, though, wasn't it? I mean,
it is. And the fact that, you couldn't write this script and have a Canadian woman walking for 3 weeks through Nazi Germany towards the end of the war, getting just barely over into the Dutch, over the Dutch border. And the moment when she walks up and she's been taken to these British soldiers because she's met these Dutch farmers, and says, please, first of all, she's forgotten quite a bit of her Dutch, almost forgotten her English, because you've been forbidden to speak anything but German for the last nearly 4 years. And so she's getting all mixed up in her head. And she was taken to these British soldiers because she says, I need to let my father know that I'm still alive. Her father hadn't heard from her. The Red Cross lost track of her in October 1943. And so she is taken to these, what she thinks are British soldiers, and walks up to a guy loading a truck and says, tries to summon up. She's 5'8". She weighs 87 pounds. She's filthy, barefoot, and summons up as much of her dignity as she can to walk up to this soldier and say, please, I'm Canadian. I need to get a message to my father. And this guy looks at her and goes, right, in the middle of the Netherlands, we've got this woman claiming to be. And he said, if you're Canadian, where are you from? And she said, my name is Mona Parsons. I'm from a little town in Nova Scotia called Wolfville. And he nearly dropped the box he was carrying and said, my name is Clarence Leonard, and we are the North Nova Scotia Highlanders. How on earth did you come to be here? And so when I wrote an agreement, I have, so it's hopefully going to be developed into either a film or a miniseries. And one of the things I was specific about in the contract, because I know that American companies like to come in and rewrite history, Enigma, hello, that you tell the story. She will be from Nova Scotia. And she will be found by the North Nova Scotia Highlanders, not the Marine Corps. She won't be from Boston. And frankly, if you can't tell the story with that modicum of truth, then I'm not interested. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, but it is a story that is just absolutely. I mean, just watching that Canadian Heritage Minute sent a shiver down my spine.
Yeah,
and when you read the whole thing, it's just incredible, and really quite forgotten at home in Nova Scotia, wasn't she?
Yes, she was, and there were reasons for that. Reasons that people didn't want her to be recognized, even when I was trying to gain some recognition for her. And it came out that. God love him. It was the executive director of a museum that I was working for, who came and said, after I'd done a presentation, a fundraising presentation actually, of notable people within Kings County, and he came up and said, "Great job, really wonderful. Could you just remove her from the presentation?" I thought, why? And I thought, oh, because you think I'm trying to sell my book. And he said, well, actually, Andria, there's, what did she ever do for this community? And I went, what? And I named off, there was Abraham Gessner and the Fuller Brush guy. And I said, all of them left. Gessner left to create the oil industry, all in the States. At least Gessner came home to die, but what she did for this community was about the same as my father and thousands of young Canadian men did in going overseas to serve. And he, at that point, said, okay, I get you're a little sensitive. A little? And he said, actually, what you don't know is that when she came back here in the 1970s, she had a bit of a drinking problem. And sort of ran afoul of people. And I went, drinking problem, really? Because I'd done the research and realized that she was she'd had a major stroke. She was having TIAs, mini strokes. And the whole concept was that she wasn't, it wasn't ladylike. And I said, you know what, if she'd come after nearly 4 years in Nazi prisons and camps, and I remember my own father having nightmares all his life from 6 years serving in the war, I'd be amazed if she didn't have a drinking problem or a drug problem or whatever. And why is it that we can't remember a woman who might have had a drinking problem, and yet we have this Sir John A. Macdonald, who was a well-known alcoholic, and that we tell these little stories about Sir John A., apocryphal though they may be, standing up on the hustings and being so drunk that he threw up and says, "Oh, that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I think of my opponent." And it's all funny. But if we have this story about a woman, vapors.
Yeah.
So it's lovely to kind of understand what you're dealing with. But gaining recognition for women has been, exceedingly hard. And for certain men, if you didn't travel in the right classes.
Yeah.
And Mona was privileged, wealthy and privileged. So I'm not saying that, but being a woman, it was a challenge.
But she now dances on, doesn't she? Because
yes, she does.
Here we go.
Yes. That was the unveiling of The Joy is Almost Too Much to Bear. And over my shoulder is the artist Niels Prem de Boer, who created her. And when he was tasked with this, and this, like any good piece of art, it was controversial because I had nothing to do with this. This was a joint effort between the Women of Wolfville, and who's a community theater project, and the Randall House Museum. And the Women of Wolfville commissioned people to put in proposals, and Nistal won. And again, here's this lovely, Mona's story is so full of synchronicities, but Nistal looked at the biography, and he was so taken with a letter she wrote when she was found by the Canadians, and they gave her paper to write to her dad. They sent telegram. And she wrote a 38-page letter between May 3rd and May 5th, 1945, describing some of her experiences. And towards the end of this letter, on May 5th, 1945, she writes, P.S. Holland has capitulated. Thrills and heartthrobs. The joy is almost too much to bear, because in the preceding pages, she's written about what we would now recognize as PTSD, about being completely unnerved by being with people and being a bit dizzy and not knowing how to behave. And so he was taken by this because, of course, his family had also lived through the occupation of the Netherlands. And he created this piece called The Joy is Almost Too Much to Bear. Well, when we unveiled the maquette in the art gallery at Acadia University in, I don't remember what year that was, and most people were supportive, but a few people who chose not to say anything took it away and had a bit of negative chat. But some who were friends of mine actually contacted me and said, why on earth would you choose to have her committed for all time to being this emaciated refugee? And I said, because the woman who escaped with her, Wendelin van Botselaar tot Echten, said to me when I filmed the documentary in 2000, and I said to her, initially she refused to be on camera. I said, we'd do cutaway shots, we'd do anything, but I wanted her voice. And finally she agreed to be seen. And I said, why did you agree to appear on the documentary? And she said, because, my dear, there comes a time when vanity must be put aside, not allowed to get in the way of a story that needs telling. Yeah. And so for me, this creation that Nistal, the concept that he came up with, that I had absolutely no input into, was such a true representation of that whole thing of, this is a moment when somebody who has had all the privilege in the world laid at her feet and then had it ripped away, to find out how you're going to survive, what makes you survive through that, so that ultimately you become victorious and that you can say the joy is almost too much to bear. I thought that was a far greater tribute to this woman and everything that she endured, everything that she stood for, social justice, freedom, peace. That is a far better testimony to anything in a couturier gown, looking like you're on top of the world.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful piece. And I've seen over various times she's been wearing other things or things put on her. Does she have a face mask now, I wonder?
It's funny you should say that. I wondered, because I looked at pictures the other day, and I made her a purple scarf, and I put the scarf on her in winter. I think it lasted a week before somebody took it. I really hope that they needed it to stay warm. But we've put we've put tulips on her. Her birthday is February 17th. We've put tulips on her at her birthday, and on May 5th, when the town of Wolfville now flies the Dutch flag in honor of Liberation Day, because the sculpture was actually unveiled on May 5th, 2017, to coincide not only with Liberation Day, but also the day she wrote the PS. So meaning all around.
Oh, stunning. It is a lovely piece. And that's outside the library, isn't it?
No, it's actually
the post office.
The Wolfville Post Office. So there are two monuments. The oak tree you see behind her, there was a fellow who was wounded in the First World War who convalesced on the grounds in a hospital in Windsor, in England. And he scooped up all these acorns from the oak tree. And when he went back after the war, he became the custodian of the post office and planted these acorns at different places around Wolfville. So she's now dancing in front of an oak that was planted during the First World War. Stunning.
Just lovely. But we've talked about Mona, but she's not the only book that you've come up with. I have another clip here. So let's take a look at this one.
I feel quite fortunate to have lived almost 49 years on this earth and to have mothered 6 children, one of whom has given me a granddaughter, and say that I have rarely ever been directly affected by evil. I've been aware of it. I've seen examples of it in the media. But I find incredibly evil a government that would have our young men and women go and fight under a lying pretense.
And what did that lead to?
Criticism. Well, actually, no. I spoke up as I did because war has affected numerous generations of my family. From the First World War, where my German great-grandmother was treated abominably by her neighbors in London because of anti-German sentiment, and to the point where she actually went to the police station and turned herself in as an enemy of the people. And the fellow behind the desk said, "Go home, Grandma. It's not your kind we're looking for." But it didn't make living with her neighbors any easier. And my grandmother, my father's mother, is Italian. And during World War II, it was harder to round up the Italians than it was the Japanese. You could confuse them with other people. And so they were required to report to the authorities in Toronto, and they couldn't travel into the United States. They couldn't cross the border, and they had to report once a month on, just to make sure that they were where they were supposed to be. And my grandmother became so incensed because she said, "My youngest brother and my eldest son are fighting in this war for Canada." And they even participated in the invasion of Italy, and they were still barred from freedom of movement. So it was that and what we were doing in Afghanistan, and it wasn't clear. And we were asking people to go, including my eldest son. And I felt that it was important because there seemed to be little critical thinking. people were very proud. And I would say to a group of people, and I still use this in workshops, how many people would say they're proud to be, Canadian, British, whatever.
Yeah.
And then I'd say, but if I was to go and ask every single person in this room why you are proud to be this thing, your answers would differ, and it could lead to conflict. And what I wanted Canadians to do was not simply gang on to this Red Fridays and wave the flag and cheerlead and talk about, if you're not prepared to stand behind our soldiers, be prepared to stand in front of them. I wanted people to think about what was going to come after. Now, my father was never a prisoner of war. My father was wounded. My father did have nightmares for the rest of his life. But we were getting to know more and more about operational stress injury, about post-traumatic stress disorder. And I knew that Canada, let alone any other country, I see it happening in the UK, they're not prepared for the mental health supports that are required by veterans. Housing, mental health, the impact on the family. And I wanted people to think about what they were doing when they participated in Red Friday, when they said, support our troops. And over the years, that was 2007, over time, about 18 months, I saw Canadian public opinion begin to shift. Now, I'm not saying I was responsible for that. I think there was fatigue with the war, but I do think the fact that anytime somebody shoved a microphone or a camera in front of my face, I'm going, what are you thinking about? What are you doing? Please think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And are you going to support those troops when far greater demands are going to come from the wounded, the physically wounded, the emotionally, spiritually, and mentally wounded?
Yeah. And you see those people on the streets now. And unfortunately, there are people who often haven't been able to get into those housing places that were provided during the whole lockdown period. They're still out there because they can't cope in normal society. Now, this also led to another book, A Mother's Road to Kandahar,
which was about navigating, which is the history of our family, respecting my son's decision to go to Afghanistan, and me respecting his choice and him respecting my choice to do what I did. And the understanding was, I love and support my son, full stop.
Yeah.
That is not synonymous with supporting a government whose motives and actions I question. And I will never stop from asking, give me answers, show me. But, the idea is that this is a family and we have to navigate and negotiate this. And there are far too many times when I've seen families, and it's not just about war, say, you will either conform to my ideal or I will have nothing more to say with you. What a horrible injury to inflict on individuals and on families.
Yeah. So what else have you got in the works? There's more to come.
Yes, there is. So I've all but completed a book about a woman from Sherbrooke, Nova Scotia. Her name was Catherine Bell Fraser, and the title of this book is Doing a Man's Work with More Than a Man's Capability. Catherine Bell Fraser and the Armenian Massacres, 1892 to 1895, or 1896. And the title pretty much gives it away. But
the title is a reminder to you where you're going. Hopefully it will shorten. Otherwise, that book is going to have to be so tall to get all of that on the spine.
Listen, think about the Mona Parsons. I didn't choose that title because I couldn't figure out a title that would just kind of grab everything. And Nimbus Publishing came up with Mona Parsons, From Privilege to Prison, from Nova Scotia to Nazi Europe. So I'm just continuing that bent.
Yeah, exactly.
Eventually the book will become known as Doing a Man's Work because it'll just be so well known. But this was a woman, from Sherbrooke, Nova Scotia, who at age 25 in 1892 gave up her job as a telegraph operator to go and, first of all, thought she was going to be a missionary in Armenia. And she went in the company of a woman who had gone over, I think in the 1880s, as a missionary, and realized what they needed were not missionaries, but doctors and medical staff. And this woman returned, Grace Kimball, returned to the United States, became a medical doctor, and then got a team of women to help her run a compound dispensary, a school, a hospital, knowing that because Armenia was in Turkey, actually Armenia didn't even exist as far as the Turks were concerned, that she would probably not be allowed to practice medicine. And if she was, it would only be on women and children, because of course, as a woman doctor, the faith, the very conservative of the time. So this was the story of these people living in this compound. And Catherine was a very idealistic, from small town Nova Scotia, although Sherbrooke certainly was way ahead of its time in the 1890s, because it had, it was a mining town. It was gold, salmon fishery. It had the first telephone network in Nova Scotia. So, she was coming from a predominantly white, backcountry colonial community, and went to Armenia thinking that, West was best and Christians were better than Muslims. And that within Christianity, though, there were the right kind of Christians. And then there were the Armenian Christians, who were, although far older in terms of Christianity or Christian faith, needed to be educated and kind of brought around to this. So it was interesting, because the original intent had been going to convert the Muslims. And when they realized that was kind of a waste of time, that they would then go and try to convert these other Christians to the right kind of Christianity. But her bias and naivete were quickly replaced by, in the beginning, she thought, of course, they're not persecuting the Armenians. Of course, they're not doing these things. And then was seeing firsthand incidents of rape and murder. And one time she describes a young Muslim boy seeing another young Christian boy, an Armenian boy, being hanged, and went home in a much agitated state and told his mother in great detail about this hanging. And when the mother went out to see friends and then came home a short time later, her son had hanged himself. These acts of barbarity and inhumanity, and boy, how modern is this? Plus ça change, plus c'est même chose. There's a cartoon that said, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. And then some guy said, and those of us who have learned from history have to watch while idiots repeat it, right?
Yeah. And we have some idiots right now, don't we? Unfortunately.
Yes, we do. And that's why, I said to you earlier on about researching my own family tree over here and finding out one of my great grandmothers was a home child, and asking for information about her from Bernardo's, and Bernardo's saying, and she wasn't a Bernardo's orphan, it's just that they hold the records now. And they sent me a letter in advance of sending the package saying, have somebody with you when you open this. And I'm thinking, I never knew this woman. I'm doing this as a researcher and a historian. And I read the record and thought, wow, living on the streets. And I should know as a therapist, right? The more I'm finding out and the more I look at the conditions in Victorian London, and the whole economic cycle, and the clearances of the slums, and the moving in of landlords who were creating buildings so that they would get more profit, not to create space for people of limited income to live, but that they would be able to charge. Even the artisans that were supposed to have benefited from these housing weren't able to live there. And I think, oh my God, this is so modern.
Yeah.
How can we continue to allow this cycle to go on, where a privileged group of people are able to treat people who have less and therefore have less of a voice? And you just come in and do your, we see it happening in Westminster every day, and in Ottawa, and it boggles the mind. And you wonder why, they talk about civil unrest and maybe uncivil unrest. I'm amazed we don't have more of it.
Well, it's part of it, I think, is the time we live in during this time of pandemic. And we started with the whole Black Lives Matter. And I think the people on streets would have been much greater crowds if it hadn't been for the whole pandemic thing. Because I think that put a lot of people off being involved in that.
I was one of them.
Yeah.
I went to the perimeter of Holyrood when they did the Black Lives Matter, but as people started to come in, I can't stay. I just wanted to, at some point go, I was here. I really was, I'm still here.
Well, tell me about lockdown for you. How has it been? I mean, I've been watching your Facebook page. Wonderful pictures of empty Edinburgh.
Yes.
Wonderful.
That was quite surreal, actually. And I enjoyed, I was thinking the other day, why did Dave stop doing those, dog walks? And then I thought, oh, right, lockdown got lifted or it's been eased. It was a little bit slower to take here in Edinburgh, but over the last, I'd say week or so, the traffic has been astonishing. And even up on the Royal Mile, I mean, normally this place would be, as the Scots say, hoaching with people. So it's obviously not that, but it's quite striking to go up the Royal Mile and see people with, maps and dragging suitcases and looking around and thinking, why are you here? Because, and it has to happen. Of course it has to happen. But I've, the only thing I've been able to look at what's going on in England in terms of lockdown and easing out of it, and what Scotland has been doing, which has been a little bit more measured, kind of like, Wales and Northern Ireland, a little bit more measured. Let's put these things into place. And if we see that things are suddenly going too fast, we're going to pull it back. For the most part, I think people have been, they've been supportive of that. They don't like it. I was going back to Nova Scotia in, I think, May 29th, and then that got bumped into June, and then it got bumped to July, and then it was August, and then Sunday morning I got a message from WestJet going, actually, we've just decided to not fly at all between Halifax and Glasgow until next April. And then, well, friends and family in Canada said, well, you could always fly Air Canada, like, that's like 15, 16 hours with time in Heathrow and time in either Montreal or Toronto before I get to Nova Scotia. And it just doesn't feel quite safe. But, I can't, here in Edinburgh, I can't speak to Friday night. In fact, because most people seem to come for city getaways, they arrive on Thursday, Friday, and they're here through the weekend. I kind of avoid the streets. I'll go down around, the Water of Leith and stuff. And on Friday evenings, we get together with, there are 2 other people in this tenement. And so we'll have takeaway, that's how we spend our Friday night. It's so exciting. But
on the landing,
our landing parties. But no, we've actually moved into the flat now. It's really quite civilized.
You've got a bubble.
All the windows open.
Oh, wow.
But it's if I showed you out the window, it's quite dim right now, but there are a series of flats all the way along, and a lot of them are Airbnbs, and they're absolutely dead. And I know that if this were the usual Edinburgh fringe season, which I know drives locals crazy and I revel in, I'd have to have the windows closed because there'd be drunk people partying.
I've heard seagulls tonight.
Yes. Oh, did you see those on Facebook?
Yes. Seagulls on your ceiling skylight.
On the skylight. And sometimes, in fact, when I was supposed to be going back to Nova Scotia, my husband Ron, we were sitting one night, he had headphones on. I was watching something on the telly, and he had headphones on watching something on his computer. So I didn't think he heard anything. And I heard, it sounded like boom, 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 boom. And then it sounded like somebody was being thrown down. And I turned the telly down and thought, And he took off his headphones and said, what the is that? And I said, it's the seagulls. And he said, now, Newfoundlander it is, Jesus by Jesus. He said, if that had happened when you were away, and I knew it wasn't Santa Claus.
Yeah.
But they're quite something, and they're quite protective. We had a leak in the skylight in the stairwell. And two guys came up one day, everybody masks, distancing. I just opened the door and went, right, there's the main skylight, off you go. And so 2 of them went up, and I could hear them walking around. I knew they weren't seagulls. And then one came down a little while later and said, oh, great, I'm going down to Lauria and going to get a couple of other things and eat. Be up in a minute. So I went, okay, good. And he came up a few minutes later carrying a bucket and a huge broom. And he said, well, he's going to fix the roof. I'm going to keep the fucking seagulls. And I could see him through the skylight winging.
Oh, God.
It was just, I wish I'd filmed it. I didn't. I was laughing so hard. But yes, seagulls. They're not as loud or as bad as they were.
Yeah, when I lived in the Blackpool area, I lived in Cleveley's. And the seagulls seemed to nest on the flat roof of the garage opposite us. And the morning squawking was just an absolute nightmare. It was horrendous.
It's been that way. It's been that way because, of course, they haven't really fledged. They're still, you can, 1 o'clock the other morning. We have, the tenements in Georgian Edinburgh, the windows are meant to be the same size as the doors so that it's all nice and symmetrical. So there's one window that actually opens like a door, and I can just stand in the window. I love doing that, the atmosphere. And the other night, across on the tenement, across from me on the roof, I could hear a juvenile going, so, and there was an adult. And so I thought, just have a bit of fun. And so I started going, and didn't the damn thing take off and fly at me? And then called in another one. I guess they figured there must have been a kid, one of their kids was somehow. I thought, no, close the window, go to bed.
They'd have been breaking in to come and get the young.
Well, this is what you do for entertainment in lockdown. You aggravate seagulls.
Oh, good grief. So no visit back to Nova Scotia for you in the immediate future?
No, not until April. WestJet says they will resume flights in April, and still trying to figure out, because my eldest granddaughter was going to be coming here for 6 months. I was going to go back, ideally in May, come back with her in July. She was going to be here for 6 months. Then my daughter Megan and her youngest daughter were going to come out. We were going to have Christmas and New Year's together, and then they were all going to go home in January.
Yeah.
Now, if quarantine rules don't change, Megan's going, I don't know if this is still viable, if we're going to come and sit there for 2 weeks, look at the inside of the flat. So.
Yeah, no, it's tricky. Well, all I can say is I know you'll have something to occupy your time because you've got 3 zillion projects on. I know you have.
I do.
We've come to that witching hour, and it is time to say a fond farewell to you. I will, however, plug the Sunday night show while I'm on, because I have my guest list. It's not been announced publicly yet, but on Sunday night, here we go. This is the only time I can say these words with smut and innuendo. I'll even put the jazz on. Here we go. Coming up on Sunday night, we're going to have some Fanny, some Hope, and some Dom. Yeah, my guests on Sunday are Fanny Compton, who has, during lockdown, produced so much stuff on social media. She's an actor, singer, she writes sketch shows, she does all kinds of stuff. Hope is Bob Hope from Emmerdale, actor Tony Ordenshaw. Absolutely wonderful. Have you seen, Andrea, any of his In the Shed?
Yes, I have, because you sent me the link. Brilliant.
Absolutely stunning.
Brilliant.
So I'm going to talk to him about that. And Dom is not a dominatrix. It's Dominic Rainford, an actor friend of mine. We worked in the Blackpool Tower Dungeons together. I'll say that again.
Goodness.
We worked in the Blackpool Tower Dungeons together. And he then went on. He worked at Funny Girls in Blackpool. Wonderful dancer. He has great legs once he gets some stockings on, I'll tell you. But now he is in France working at Disneyland Paris. So we'll find out how they're coping with the whole thing there. So that sounds like an interesting show, doesn't it?
Absolutely brilliant. I look forward to it.
And I expect comments, because you always do. And Verna McPhee, if you're watching now, you haven't asked a question about Sean Bean this week. She really wants me to get Sean Bean on the show. I'm trying. I'm doing what I can.
Actually, There are a number. Again, thinking after last week's show when you were with Charlie.
Yes.
And I was thinking about people like Deb Allen and talking to young actors in the UK or in Canada about what they're doing, what they see, how they're keeping it together. You mentioned Julian, but Deb Allen definitely jumped to mind. So
yeah. Deb, if you're watching, you could be another guest on Mockdown Confidential.
Love it.
Turning the jazz up. There we go. Andrea, it's been an honor and a privilege having you here this evening.
I've enjoyed it immensely. Thank you.
The studio crowd have loved it, haven't you, studio crowd? There we go. Listen to them. Oh, good Lord. Yes, Andrea, you're wonderful. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Go and have a large gin. Let me find the closing titles here. Oh, they're loving it. They're loving it. Here's the closing title. Thank you, Andrea.
Bye, Judy. Bye.